Hey everyone, I'm really excited. I'm joined by Molly Suber Thorpe. Welcome back, Molly.
Hi everyone.
You're one of the best teachers in this space, in my opinion.
Thank you. Thank you.
What are you going to be sharing with us today?
Today, I have created a miniature case study for a fictitious client, and I'm going to show you my process for designing a calligraphic logotype for them. I'll be demonstrating in Procreate, but I see people already in the comments wondering, can this apply to other software? And the answer is absolutely. I'm going to really actually be talking about the principles that you have to keep in your mind when you're designing like the actual letter forms and the shape of a lettered logotype. So you can follow along with pencil and paper if you want, but I'll get into that as we go. You'll see. You don't even need Procreate per se.
That's great to know. And is it just me, or are these getting increasingly popular? Because I know they've been around for a good while, but I feel like right now they're pretty hot, right?
Yeah, they're having a resurgence. I mean, think about like Coca-Cola, right? One of the most famous logos of all time, hand lettered. Beautiful. And then, yeah, we took this huge turn towards digital typing when, people were like, oh, computers can do anything. And then people realized computers can't do everything. They can't make things look so handmade. So yeah, we're back to that sort of organic human touch, and lots of branding materials that you see nowadays do incorporate hand lettering.
Love that. Well, without further ado, over to you, Molly.
Okay, awesome. So as I said, just to clarify, as I get my screen sharing going here, I'm going to be discussing the design aspect of this. I'm not getting into like the business side and the later, vectorization, exporting side. So what I want to do, I'm just making sure my screen capture works. All right, Tom, everything good? You can see that?
Looks stunning, yes.
Okay, amazing. So like I said, I created a fake company to work with here for this case study, because I think that examples like this always work best if you can actually create a design with an actual mission. So I'm just going to show you a couple slides to present this case study so that we all have in our minds the exact same project brief, right? Just as you would if you were working with a real life branding client. So I'll tell it like a story. I get an email from a client or a new customer, and they say, hey, we want a logo design of our brand new company. It's called Manaki. We make olive oil, and we want it in your script calligraphy. Now, that's all that they say. And that's pretty common when you work with clients. People just write really open-ended inquiries. So as lettering artists, we have to think about some very special considerations that we need to fire back at them in the form of questions in order to inform the design process. So as a lettering artist, we are just that. We are artists. But as soon as we create commercial work, we're designers too. So when I'm asked what's the difference between art and design, I often say that artwork is something that you create for yourself, for self-fulfillment. But design is the solution to a problem. You can also think of it as the answer to a question. So what is the problem here on our hands? Well, it's that we have this new company that makes olive oil, and they need a logotype that will reflect their brand, that will project the value of their product, that will stand out from shelves, and that will apply to all branding applications in the future. And by branding applications, I just literally mean every place that their logo will appear. So number one, lettering artists. For all graphic designers, legibility is important. But because we draw letters by hand, a lot of that art form actually comes from how we push and pull the shapes of letters. And even myself, I sometimes fall into this trap. It's easy to push and pull a bit too much so that not 100% of the public who sees it might be able to read it. And for that reason, I always recommend that when you do a project, but especially a commercial one, you run your drafts by a third party, someone who doesn't know what it's supposed to say, and just make 5,000% sure that they can read every single letter, and the flourishes that you added or that fancy letter that you made can't be mistaken for another letter.
So, and Molly, I'm guessing this very much Yeah, exactly. The applications. This is the difference between what you've covered in previous sessions, where it might be very flourish heavy and more intricate, versus a logo type is all about where is it going to be shown and the legibility in those specific contexts, right?
Exactly. So lots of logos are really flourished, but that's exactly right. Some logos have very unorthodox applications. And so the reason I chose this olive oil brand as a case study is that you have to start thinking that when you have a product-based company that you're working for, as opposed to a company that's maybe all service-oriented or all digital, they have unique applications. So for example, the first question I'll fire back at this client in reply to their initial email is, do you have any unique product applications that you already know of that this logo has to go on, like the metal screw tops of your bottles or packaging or the wooden barrels at your olive vineyard or whatever? And so let's pretend that they write back and they say, oh yeah, you're right. We're gonna put them on our bottle caps. So that's one piece of information we keep in our mind as we go.
And Molly, I'm guessing as well, you need to give them freedom to use it in future applications they may not have even thought of. So it's a great foundation. Where are they using it today, but also where might they use it tomorrow?
That is exactly right. As the designer, you can only control how the logo looks when you give it to your client. You cannot control what they do with it later. So you want to make the most versatile, easy to slap on and use in all sorts of settings logo design that you possibly can. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to quickly show you that this is a photo. I designed this logo for a shoe brand once, and I was told up front, well, this has to get embossed into the rubber soles of our shoes. So I thought to myself, okay, that means that I can't really use any overlapping strokes or multicolors to indicate anything crucial to the legibility of the logo. So it's the kind of thing to think about in general for logos. Making it able to be one color is really crucial. So yes, legibility. If you take away nothing else, think about legibility. Now, here are some tattoos that I've designed. Today we're designing a logo, but tattoos are the best example that I can give of being able to design lettering that can then be printed, in this case with a needle on ink, but printed in such a way that they're not using a conventional printer or a pen, and the bleeding of the strokes is built into the printing process. So whenever I design a logo that I even know is going to be printed on paper, I actually think of it almost like a tattoo, in the sense that someday this might get printed on a bottle cap or on a piece of wood, and the strokes might bleed a little bit. So as lettering artists, we really have to think about making sure that our letters and our strokes are spaced far apart enough so that if a little bit of bleeding occurs when our logo type is reproduced later, it will still be legible, right? So, right. So we have that to keep in mind as well. So adequate spacing. Second question is one that any designer asks: how would you describe your brand? Give me some keywords. I usually start them off like, do you want more modern or more old fashioned? So let's pretend that in this case, the client comes back and says, well, we want something modern and we want young people to find it appealing, but we also have a more expensive product than our competition, so it has to look expensive. Okay, so those are our three key phrases in our minds. Then lastly, and this is crucial for every logo designer, but really when you're doing a hand-drawn logo, will you be adding a tagline or a subtitle in your logo down the road? This is crucial if you can think about how you would write a word by hand, where you have strokes that come down below your word, or you might have flourishes that come below your word. And you need to plan in advance for the possibility that additional elements are going to have to fit in with your design. So in this imaginary case, the client comes back and says, extra virgin olive oil has to be written underneath the logo, which is very crucial info that they didn't give in the initial client brief. So it's a good thing that we asked. So we have to leave space there. So now let's get into the actual design process, just keeping those three crucial things in mind. We have to make sure legibility is there with adequate spacing. We have to have the keywords modern, young, and expensive in our minds, and we have to leave room for a tagline. All right, so I'm switching over here to Procreate, but honestly, what I'm about to show you, you'll see this can be applied to pencil and paper if you want to follow along that way from home.
For me, that was super clear, and some great tips about that early brief phase, which are just going to save a lot of headaches down the line and just probably lead to a much stronger outcome.
Good. Yes, good. Thank you. Yeah, I really want to focus a lot on principles. All right, so in Procreate, I always have a blank file saved for myself that has my own company logo on it. And so since I'm walking you through the actual process that I use, I thought I would walk you through this step as well. I just duplicate that blank file for myself and open the copy and work right in that. Because if I ever want to send off proofs straight away to a client, like I'm out at a cafe and I want to do that, it's nice to have it appear on basically like a letterhead or a branded document. So let me get started by creating a little guide for myself, some baselines and some slant lines. Not totally mandatory, but I just like that for, giving myself a sense of spacing. I'm going to use my calligraphy composition maker. I'm just using this pattern brush with a 65-degree slant. And I'm going to put my pen down and just cover my page with this grid. I'm using a purple color just so that it will contrast well to the color of the inking and the sketching that I'm about to do. But really, any grid that you already have, or even gridded paper, that'll work just fine. Great.
Amazing. And that's on a new layer, is it, Molly?
Yes, that's on a blank layer. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I keep my logo hidden down here at the bottom. I don't touch it, and I do all my work on new blank layers.
Incredible.
Okay, so now I'm tapping my selection tool, and I'm just going to drag this down a little bit below my logo. Call me a crazy perfectionist, but I like to set up my workspace in a very specific way. All right, I'm reducing the opacity on this a little bit so that it doesn't distract with my sketches, and I'm switching back to black. Now I will come over here to a pencil. Let's use a pencil that comes with Procreate so that you don't feel like you need a special brush for this sketching part. Where are my pencils? Sketching. There you go. So let's just use this pencil that comes with Procreate to start our sketches. All right, so our company name is Manaki. I picked it because it's a type of olive that they make olive oil out of, and it seemed like a pretty word. So let's think about how we can achieve modern and young. So when I think of that with lettering, I think immediately all lowercase. That sounds nice. Modern and young, all lowercase. So let's just give it a try. I'm just going to start sketching out in really rough sketching form this word, Manaki, so that I can picture it in my head what kind of spacing we're talking about. Okay, I immediately can see that I like this in terms of uniformity, but it doesn't really look expensive yet. So what would I do to make it look more expensive? Flourishes often add a little bit of fanciness to a design.
I was going to be sad if you didn't use flourishes, Molly, because I know you're the flourishing queen.
I do love my flourishes. So I might come in and sketch some flourishes in like this. And then I'll stop and I'll remind myself, no, I can't do that last flourish because our client said they need to put a tagline there. So no to those. And then I can sit for ages and just kind of redo this, over and over and look at different possible flourishes that I could add, different ways that I could create movement and flow without making it, let's say, too long or too off the client brief, right? Not too formal. So now we'll say, okay, well, I thought that maybe lowercase would be good, but maybe uppercase would be good too. Let's try something a little bit fancier and see if it can still fulfill that client brief. And again, I usually just start with pretty basic letters so that I can adjust them. I don't right off the bat start trying to make anything that I've never drawn before or that is some totally different style, because I'd rather tweak and push and pull than, sit and try to just compose something new from whole cloth. Mm-hmm. So here, let's see. Okay, this is kind of nice. It fulfills the brief that I can put a tagline here, but okay, let's make this really small. This is what you also have to do with logo designs as you work, even if you're on the computer.
I naturally just squinted there. I was like,
oh, I squint too. But on my screen, everything's relative, but on my screen right now, that last one we just did is 1 inch wide. Now, a bottle cap is about 1 inch. So I'm thinking to myself, if this were printed well with high contrast, would all of these be legible? And I already can see that, in my opinion, that the first two here are more legible than the second. And the reason for that is contrast of height. So the contrast of this negative space, the height of that uppercase letter, compared to the much smaller height of the X height, that makes it harder to read at a really small size, because when that big M is shrunk down, the lowercase letters have to be shrunk even more. So I'm thinking to myself, maybe this would work better for a digital type of brand, but if we're printing it on tiny, tiny things for every single product that they have, I don't consider that very successful. So then I think, okay, what about something in between? Uppercase, lowercase, with a bit of flourish. Let's give that a try. And let's spread it out even more. Oops, I keep doing that where I forget the I. So we'll spread it out even more, because in a moment we're going to ink it and see how it looks when we have thicker strokes. Try a flourish there, try a flourish here. Okay, again, I'm looking back at this and deciding I already don't like this second design that we made. I'm liking the first and I'm liking the fourth to fill the client brief, because in my opinion, they have a nice flow and a nice slant that is casual and seems a bit young and kind of modern as well. But they can also look expensive because they have this nice slant and they have some flourishing and they have a sort of looseness that I think, that sort of breezy look that doesn't look like it was trying too hard, the kind of effortless expensive, at least in my mind, that feels like it's going to work. So I'm going to just try this now a couple times and make sure that I have the letter forms themselves in the shapes that I would like. Let me zoom in a bit. Probably that's easier for you. Okay, so if I keep my M like this, I might say, okay, what if it comes up and in? Kind of like that. What if my A's have a space in them here? All right, kind of like that. Zoom out, keep zooming in and out, in and out. Okay, I don't like that A, because when it's really small, this gap will become what I call a point of tension. This will not be very easy to print at a really small size. This could bleed. This could look sloppy.
I was going to say, when it went small, it looked like an accident.
Yes, exactly. And this is an example I see a lot in modern calligraphers, right? What letter is that? Lowercase b or lowercase h? This is a great example of a legibility issue that can occur for lots of people. What is that? Is that an L with a flourish, or is it a C and then an L? It might be very clear to you who wrote it, but this is the example of the type of thing that there is absolutely nothing wrong with those letters, and in context they could be readable, and if you like them and it's your art, that's great. But when you're designing for a brand, try to put a different set of eyes on that a client or a stranger or someone on a shelf, could they conceivably be confused by the shapes that I just drew? So let's see. I'm going to scratch this one. In fact, undo it completely because I didn't like those A's. But I'm going to try a more spaced out, slightly, let's see, slightly. Oh
no, there's an extra N.
Yeah, you're right. Manaki. Okay. So the next step, and I can go on like this forever, and I'm sure that you could as well at home, go through, pages and pages of just sketching out various ideas. Well, what I'll do next, though, when I feel like I have some sketches that I want to see in phase 2, is reduce the opacity or get a sheet of tracing paper over your pen and your pencil and paper and make a new layer. And I'm coming to my Calligraphy Nibs brush pack. And here I'm going to choose my favorite one, the first one, the Fine Point Calligraphy pen in smooth. Again, if you're following along with paper, you can just use a marker pen even, just something to get thick and thin strokes in there. So I'm going to go over these relatively quickly because I really just want to get a sense of how these thick and thin strokes read when this is really small. So let's see. Number 1. Zooming way out.
And Molly, sorry, did you say this is your Calligraphy Nibs pack that you're using for the inking?
That is right. My Calligraphy Nibs brush pack. Right.
Amazing, yeah.
All right, so let's see. I've made this really small. On my screen, it's just 1 inch wide, and I can read it. And I know very well as well that very few people are only going to see this company for the first time on a bottle cap, but still, it has to be very legible, right? And that works. I don't have points of tension. I don't have places that would look like a mistake. And if there were bleed around the edges of all of these lines, I'm pretty sure it would still be readable. So that's a successful option. I'm going to try this one here, which is similar. And just make a few. Now, depending on your relationship with your client, you may be able to send them a more informal presentation of designs, or you may want to take it into the computer and create a more professional sort of PDF presentation. But whatever it may be, when I send my first initial round of proofs to a client, I basically create inked versions that I think are 90% there. None of them could just immediately be slapped on a logo, but all of them are concepts that I think work. They're all concepts that I would be fine, happy telling them would work for their brand, in my opinion, that I think work with their brief, but that I know that if they select, I'll refine even further. All right, so let's do one here that's a bit crazier, just for the sake of contrast on your screen. I'm not even really going over my pencil too closely. All right, cool. So now I'm going to turn off my pencil, and I'm just going to slightly rearrange these. Now, like I said, I don't often just sit at a cafe and do all of my work and send off to clients, but sometimes I do. So this is literally how I do it sometimes. And like I said, if I have a relationship with a client where this would be acceptable, this is how I do it. All right. And then I would just number them 1 through 4 here and probably export up here as a PDF. So we're going to go with number 3. All right. So we got our email back from our client. Oh, I love number 3. Let's go with that. But can we see how it looks like with the tagline in there and, just a little bit, make it more refined. Actually, let's pretend that they do what a lot of clients actually do, which is to get really picky. And they say, okay, yeah, we like it. But what we'd really like is to make sure that all of your A's come up to the same point, because the A's, they look pretty different from each other. We want them to look a little bit more similar. And we don't like how far the tail of the I goes. This is very common type of feedback. I'm trying to be as realistic as possible. So I say, okay, let's come back to number 3 here. I'm going to get my selection tool. I'm going to select number 3, swipe down with 3 fingers, and hit cut and paste. And now this number 3 is on its own layer, and I can turn off the previous layer. All right. Now, I'm not going to mess with this one because it's the original, and I always want to have a point of comparison, even to show the client, because when a client has edits, they can often forget how it looked before. So you want to make sure that you show them, no, look, I did do a lot of changes. So we're just going to rename this original number 3. Now I'm going to copy it. I'm duplicating it, and I'm dragging it down below. And I'll reduce the opacity. All this dragging, opacity, whatever, it can be resolved with a few sheets of tracing paper, which sometimes I do miss and I go back to with my pencil. Tracing paper is so fun. So we have this copy here, and this is what we're using, obviously, as our template to create our changes. So I don't want to write on this layer. I want a new blank layer over it. And so with that blank layer, I'm going to zoom in here and remind myself, okay, this client wanted me to shorten this and make the A's the same height. They really wanted things to look like it was just more of a block of letters there. So number one, what can I do here on the eye? If I remove this, I'll come into my previous layer actually, and I'm just going to erase the tail of the eye. Now on my new blank layer, what can I do with this eye? Well, maybe it would be cool to mirror this entry stroke of the M with the exit stroke of the I, sort of a miniature version. So let me give that a try. I think I probably will like that. And then when I go through and rewrite this with a little bit more care, I'm also going to really pay attention to my X height line here and make sure that everything hits perfectly. So let me just come through and do this. I just want to zoom in here and point something out. Right here and here and here, I have intentionally overshot the baselines and the X height lines slightly. And that's because when I'm done, I'm going to come back and I'm going to really give my client what they wanted, the sense of a block of letters. So I'm going to, take a small eraser tool. I'm actually going to literally cut off these caps of these strokes at the lines. So this is going to look like it's going to have a very sharp look to those stroke endings. And I actually think that that's going to perhaps work even more toward that modern, expensive keywords of the client brief.
You know what? It really does. It looks quite classy, and where it was a bit rounded, I think it lost that very slightly.
I agree. Let's see. Now I'm zooming out a bit again for the eye, just because I want to look at that M shape that I'm about to try to emulate freehand. Okay, I kind of like that it goes below the baseline there because, you know, this M comes up high, and even though we need to leave that room for the tagline will still fit with this eye that comes a bit below the baseline. So that's fine, but I am going to be picky, and I'm going to make this K sit on the baseline. I'm self-editing here because I don't like actually how I did that K. There we go.
This is so good, Molly. I can already start to picture it on a label or on a bottle or something. And I think, you know, this would work super well for the high-end olive oil. I could see it on a bottle of spirits as well, like tequila or something.
That's true. Yeah, I think that, I don't know. I mean, it is becoming so trendy now that there are lots of brands that use hand lettering, but I agree. I mean, I'm biased, but I love hand lettered brands.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
Me too.
So I have here, I'm going to turn off the grid actually. I have here the basic presentation that I'll send my client. And in real life, your client may very often say, can I see one version where the K doesn't have a flourish and another one where this and this and this? So quite often I do find myself sending a phase two proof round to a client and say, okay, here's your original and here's new versions 1 through 5, right? But we're doing a case study so you can see we're just making one edit round at this point. So I would send this back to the client. Here's the original. Here's your revision. No, I wouldn't because they wanted to see the tagline. All right. So at this point, if you're doing pencil on paper, you can just sketch it in. We're talking about really spacing here and contrast and ratio. But I'm going to just quickly add text, extra virgin olive oil. All right, and now let's just use my favorite font of all time, my brand font. It's called Sagona. Let's make this all caps. Oh yeah, the new Procreate 5X thinks it's being very fancy in some ways, but it's actually added more steps to things like text editing. Okay.
Although I remember when this wasn't even possible.
That's
the whole
true.
text side.
That is true. I am thrilled that we can have text in Procreate now. Okay, so I just tapped this out here and I'm going to throw it down below. I'm going to turn off that previous one. I just really want to give myself a sense of this as a brand. Oops. Okay. And
that looks so good, honestly.
Yeah, I do kind of like it. And now I'm going to zoom out, bring it down to about 1 inch. I can still read the entire thing, actually, even the tagline. So we'll send this off to the client, and most likely in real life, you'd have lots of back and forth about what font to use down there and a tiny little tweak here, tiny little tweak there. But in essence, right, this is the process that I would use. And then you'll be able to, if you do the computer side of it, take it into the computer and do vectorizing, which I'm happy to talk about in a whole other session if you're interested. And do the final exporting and color palettes and mock-ups. So I just want to show you, it's slightly different, but it was the first thing that I think I showed you. Page 1 of my slides. This was the preview image that I made for the class. And I had
That's so cool.
Up, right, with the design mocked up in a Photoshop image for my client to see how their new logo would look.
I love that. Well, firstly, I just want to say incredible session. And I am amazed that subtle tip of kind of shaving the tops and bottoms off of those rounded areas. When you see the two logos above each other like that, it makes such a difference. The one below feels that much more classy and elegant. It's incredible. Yeah, those tiny subtle details. In fact, now I'm looking at it, more self-editing. Come in with my eraser, and I'm gonna, oops, no, too small. I'm gonna slice that so it looks like it's cut in. I'm gonna slice that, and I'm gonna slice that. And now there's that sharpness all throughout. And I even forgot to do it here on the K. So, just to make it perfect, be a perfectionist. There you go. Much, much better even. Beautiful. I love it. Molly, that was so incredible as always. I just love your teaching style, Molly. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. So good. Thank you so much, Molly. I'll chat to you really soon. And we really appreciate you being part of this birthday event. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tom. All right. Bye, Molly.